Thessaly smelled the smoke before she opened her eyes. It wasn't the familiar scent of a hearth burning low or candles guttering in their holders. This was something chemical and alive, something that clawed at the inside of her throat and sat heavy in her lungs like a warning her body understood before her mind caught up. She sat up in bed. The air in the chamber was hazy, a thin gray veil drifting across the ceiling like a slow-moving ghost. For 2 full seconds, she stared at it, her brain refusing to connect what she was seeing with what it meant. Then the alarm bells started. The sound split the night open. Deep, iron-throated clangs that rattled through the stone walls of Thornhaven Castle and turned the silence into chaos. Thessaly threw the covers off and hit the floor barefoot, her nightgown tangling around her legs as she lurched toward the door. The corridor was already filling with smoke, not the thin haze of her chamber. This was thick, rolling, pouring down from the east wing like a living thing. Servants ran past her, some half-dressed, some carrying children. Glass shattered in the distance, and beneath it all, the deep, hungry roar of fire eating through wood and stone. Thessaly ran. Not toward the exits, not toward safety. She ran toward the east wing because that was where Drystan's study was, where he spent his nights when he worked late. And he always worked late. Her bare feet slapped against stone that was already growing warm. The smoke thickened with every step, burning her eyes, coating the back of her throat. She pulled the collar of her nightgown over her mouth and kept moving. She found him at the junction of the east corridor. Drystan Vale, Alpha King of Ashenmere, stood in the center of the hallway like a wall the fire hadn't figured out how to move yet. He was shirtless, his chest streaked with soot. And even in the chaos, the sheer physical presence of him made the corridor feel smaller. His dark eyes locked onto hers through the smoke, and for one brief, suspended second, the world contracted to just the two of them. Relief hit her so hard her knees almost buckled. He was alive. He was standing. He was here. Then the scream came, high-pitched, raw with terror, cutting through the roar of the flames from somewhere deeper in the east wing. Thessaly didn't recognize it immediately, but she saw the moment Drystan did. His head snapped toward the sound, and something shifted in his expression. Recognition. Decision. He looked back at Thessaly. Their eyes met. The bond between them, that invisible thread she'd carried in her chest since the day they were mated, pulled taut. She could feel his conflict, could feel the sharp edge of the choice forming behind his eyes before he'd even made it. "Go to the courtyard," he said, his voice rough from the smoke. "The guards will get you out." Then he turned and ran toward the scream. Away from her. Thessaly stood frozen, watching his broad back disappear into the black smoke of the east wing. The fire was louder there, angrier. She could see the glow of it painting the walls orange and red, and he ran straight into it without looking back. He ran toward Seraphine Kale. The realization landed in her chest like a fist. Lady Seraphine, daughter of the Northern Ambassador, the woman who had arrived at Thornhaven 3 weeks ago with her diplomatic smiles and her elegant dresses and her way of making every room she entered feel like it belonged to her. Drystan had chosen her first. A beam cracked overhead. Thessaly threw herself sideways as a section of the ceiling collapsed where she'd been standing, showering the corridor with embers and splintered wood. The impact knocked her into the wall. Something burning landed on her forearm, and the pain was white-hot, immediate, and so sharp it stole her breath. She scrambled to her feet, cradling her arm against her chest. The smoke was everywhere now, thick enough to chew. She couldn't see the end of the corridor. A hand grabbed her shoulder. A guard. His face was covered in ash, his eyes wide and panicked. "My lady, this way. Now." He half-carried, half-dragged her through corridors she couldn't recognize anymore. Her arm throbbed with every step, and somewhere along the way, her other hand found a burning doorframe and didn't let go fast enough. She didn't scream. She bit down so hard on the inside of her cheek she tasted blood, and she kept moving. The night air hit her like a wall of cold water when they finally stumbled into the courtyard. She gasped, doubled over, her lungs burning as they tried to remember what clean air felt like. Around her, the courtyard was a scene of controlled panic. Servants huddled in clusters. Guards shouted orders. The east wing of Thornhaven was fully ablaze, flames licking up toward the sky like reaching fingers. And then the crowd shifted, murmured, parted. Drystan emerged from the burning castle. Seraphine Kale was in his arms, her pale nightgown streaked with soot, her face pressed against his chest. He carried her like she weighed nothing, his jaw set, his arms wrapped around her like he'd rather burn than let go. The crowd erupted. Guards rushed forward. Someone shouted for the healers. Voices overlapped with relief, with praise, with awe. The king saved her, pulled her from the fire himself. She would have died. No one looked at Thessaly. She stood at the edge of the courtyard, barefoot on cold stone, her burned hands hanging at her sides. She watched Drystan lower Seraphine onto a stretcher with a gentleness that made something inside her crack. And in her chest, where the mating bond had hummed like a second heartbeat for 2 years, something went quiet, not weaker, not distant, silent. The infirmary smelled of poultice and panic. Thessaly sat on the edge of a cot, her hands wrapped in linen bandages that had already bled through in places, and stared at the far wall. Around her, the healers moved with the efficient, grim focus of people who had too many patients and not enough hours. The fire had injured 37 people. 3 were critical. 2 servants from the east wing hadn't been found at all. Thessaly's burns covered both forearms from wrist to elbow and most of her right palm. Second degree, Metha had said, her weathered face unreadable as she'd cleaned and dressed the wounds. For a shifter, they would heal in days, maybe a week. But that was the thing about shifters. They healed fast because their wolves pushed the process along, knitting tissue, fighting infection, flooding the body with regenerative energy that humans could only dream of. Thessaly's wolf wasn't pushing anything. She hadn't told anyone. Not Metha, not Jorin, not the guards who'd carried her out. She certainly hadn't told Drystan, who hadn't come to see her yet. It had been 9 hours since the fire, and the Alpha King of Ashenmere had not set foot in the infirmary to check on his Luna. He'd been busy, of course, coordinating the response, assessing the damage, ensuring the surviving wing was structurally sound. She knew this because Jorin had told her, his voice carefully neutral, when he'd stopped by 2 hours ago to confirm she was alive. "The king asked after you," the beta had said, standing in the doorway like he wasn't sure he was welcome. "That's kind," Thessaly had replied, and Jorin had given her a look she couldn't quite read before leaving. Now it was midday, and the castle was buzzing with a single story. The king had rushed into the burning east wing and saved Lady Seraphine Kale, the northern ambassador's daughter, carrying her out in his arms while the ceiling collapsed behind them. It was, by every account, the most heroic thing anyone had ever seen. Thessaly had heard the story 4 times already, each time told by a different servant or healer passing through the infirmary, each time slightly more embellished. In one version, the king had shielded Lady Seraphine with his own body. In another, he had broken through a burning door with his bare hands to reach her. None of the versions mentioned Thessaly. She wasn't angry. That was the strangest part. She should have been furious, should have been screaming, should have felt something hot and righteous burning through her chest, but there was nothing. Just a flat, gray calm that sat over everything like the ash that now coated every surface of Thornhaven. The door opened, and Drystan walked in. He looked terrible. A cut above his left eyebrow had been stitched but not cleaned properly, and his hands were raw and red from the fire. He'd changed clothes, but he still smelled of smoke, and beneath it, his scent. Cedar and iron and something warm that used to make her wolf purr with contentment. Now it was just a smell. He crossed the infirmary in 4 strides, his gaze locked on her, and dropped to one knee beside her cot. Thessaly. His voice was low, rough, stripped of the authority he wore like armor in front of everyone else. "Let me see your hands." She held them out. The bandages were professionally done. There was nothing for him to see that Matha hadn't already handled. He held her wrists gently, turning her hands over, and something in his expression tightened. "I should have come sooner," he said. "The East Wing, the structural reports. I should have been here." "You were needed elsewhere," Thessaly said. It came out perfectly even. No accusation, no bitterness, no tremor. Just a simple, factual statement that made Drystan flinch like she'd slapped him. "Thessaly, I didn't—" He stopped, started again. Lady Seraphine's chamber was directly above the origin of the fire. The floor was already giving way when I reached her. If I hadn't gone when I did, she would have died, Thessaly finished. "I know." He searched her face, looking for the anger, the hurt, the reaction he clearly expected. He found nothing. Thessaly watched him search and felt a distant, detached sympathy for him. He wanted her to fight, wanted her to scream at him so he could apologize, could explain, could make it right through the sheer force of his remorse. But the part of her that would have fought was quiet. "How bad are the burns?" he asked. "Matha says they'll heal," Thessaly said. "A few days." That was what Matha had said. What Matha hadn't said, what Thessaly hadn't told her, was that the burns weren't healing at all. Not the way they should. Not the way a shifter's body healed. It had been 9 hours. The skin beneath the bandages looked exactly the same as it had when Matha first dressed the wounds. No new tissue forming, no accelerated knitting. Her body was healing at a human pace, which meant her body was no longer operating like a shifter's. "I need to go," Drysand said, standing. "The northern delegation needs to be reassured. Seraphine's father will want to know she's safe." "Of course," Thessaly said. He paused at the door, turned back. His expression was open and pained and desperately searching for something she wasn't giving him. "We'll talk tonight," he said. "Properly, I promise." Thessaly nodded and he left. The infirmary settled back into its rhythm. Healers moved between cots. Someone groaned in the corner. Outside, the ruins of the East Wing still smoked. Thessaly sat very still and reached inward. Past the calm, past the gray, past the place where emotion should have lived, she reached for her wolf. The wolf who had been with her since she was 14. The wolf who had recognized Drystan as their mate before Thessaly's human mind had caught up. The wolf who had pressed forward with joy every time he walked into a room, who had howled silently with contentment every night she fell asleep in his arms. She reached, and reached, and reached. Silence, not dormancy, not retreat, not the quiet of a wolf resting or sulking or gathering strength. This was absence. A hollow where something living used to be, like reaching into a drawer for something you kept there for years and finding it empty. Thessaly pulled her bandaged hands into her lap and stared at them. Her wolf was gone. 3 days after the fire, Thessaly stood in the undamaged corridor of the West Wing and tried to smell the roses in the courtyard below. She couldn't. A week ago, she could have identified every flower in the garden from this window. Could have separated the roses from the jasmine from the night-blooming cereus that the groundskeeper cultivated along the southern wall. She could have told you what the cook was preparing for dinner 3 floors down and whether the bread was wheat or rye. Now she smelled stone and cold air and nothing else. Her hearing was next. The subtle erosion of it was almost worse than the loss of scent because it happened in pieces. First, the distant conversations disappeared, the ones she used to catch from across the courtyard without trying. Then the heartbeats. She'd always been able to hear Drystan's heartbeat when he stood close enough, that steady, solid rhythm that her own heart would match without her telling it to. Now she couldn't hear it even when he stood right beside her. Not that he stood beside her often anymore. The fire had rearranged the geometry of the castle in ways that went beyond architecture. With the east wing destroyed, space was limited. Rooms had been reassigned, schedules reorganized, and at the center of all of it, like a sun everything else orbited, was Lady Seraphine Kale. She was recovering in the Queen's guest suite, which was the finest room still standing. She was being attended by 2 personal healers, 3 servants, and a rotating cast of courtiers who arrived with flowers and well wishes and stayed to gossip about how brave the king had been. And she was, Thessaly had to admit, genuinely lovely. Not just beautiful, though she was that too, all auburn hair and wide green eyes and the kind of bone structure that painters would fight over. But lovely in the way she spoke, softly and with consideration. Lovely in the way she thanked every servant by name. Lovely in the way she'd sent a handwritten note to Thessaly expressing her gratitude and her hope that the Luna was recovering well. Thessaly had read the note twice, folded it carefully, and put it in a drawer. The problem wasn't Seraphine. The problem was what Seraphine's presence revealed. Drystan visited her daily. Political necessity, he explained. Her father, Lord Kale, controlled the northern trade routes. The fire had happened on Thornhaven's watch, and the diplomatic fallout required careful management. He needed to ensure Lady Seraphine felt safe, valued, protected. Thessaly understood all of this, understood it perfectly, rationally, completely. But understanding didn't stop the whispers she caught in the corridors, the ones her fading hearing still picked up if she stood close enough and concentrated hard enough. Have you seen how he looks at her? Well, she is an ambassador's daughter. Proper bloodline. Proper breeding. And the Luna is... what, exactly? A woodcutter's daughter from the outer villages? I've always wondered what he saw in her. Perhaps he's wondering the same thing now. Thessaly kept walking. She didn't stop, didn't react, didn't let her expression shift by so much as a fraction. She had become very good at that over the past 3 days, keeping her face perfectly still while pieces of her fell away. The burns on her arms were healing, but slowly. Human, slowly. Mitha had begun watching her with an expression Thessaly recognized because she'd seen it on the old healer's face before. It was the expression Mitha wore when a wound wasn't behaving the way it should. "Let me take your vitals again," Mitha said that afternoon, her tone just a shade too casual. Thessaly held out her arm. Mitha pressed 2 fingers to her wrist, counting silently, and Thessaly watched the old woman's brow furrow deeper with each passing second. "Your pulse is slow," Mitha murmured. "I'm relaxed," Thessaly offered. Mitha ignored this. She lifted one of the bandages on Thessaly's forearm and examined the burn beneath. The silence stretched for a very long time. "This should be nearly closed by now," Mitha said, not quite making it a question. "It's getting there." "It isn't." Mitha straightened up, fixing Thessaly with a gaze that had made grown warriors confess to eating sweets before supper. "Your healing rate has dropped. Dramatically. When was the last time you shifted?" The question landed like a stone in still water. "I've been injured," Thessaly said carefully. "Shifting with burns would accelerate the healing process. Any wolf knows that. It's the first thing your body should be demanding." Mitha's eyes narrowed. "Is your wolf demanding it?" Thessaly said nothing. The silence answered for her. "Thessaly," Mitha said, her voice changing, dropping into something lower and more urgent. "When was the last time you felt your wolf?" The words sat in Thessaly's throat like glass. She had been carrying this secret for 3 days, holding it close and tight because saying it out loud would make it real, and she wasn't ready for it to be real. But Maitha's eyes were steady and patient and deeply, unmistakably concerned, and Thessaly was so tired of pretending. "The night of the fire," she whispered. "I felt her during the fire. She was trying to push forward, trying to help me get out. And then we were in the courtyard, and I saw him carrying Seraphine, and something just—" She stopped, swallowed, went quiet. Maitha sat down slowly. "I've been reaching for her," Thessaly continued, her voice barely audible. "Every morning, every night. I reach, and there's nothing. Not sleeping, not hiding. Nothing. Like she was never there." "That's not possible," Maitha said, but her voice lacked conviction. "A wolf doesn't just vanish." "I know. Have you told the king?" Thessaly almost laughed. "Told him what? That his Luna is broken? That the woman he chose to mate can't shift, can't heal, can't smell, can barely hear?" She shook her head. "He has enough to deal with. The East Wing? The delegation? Lady Seraphine?" "You are his mate," Maitha interrupted, her voice sharp. "You are his priority." "Am I?" Thessaly asked. The question came out quieter than she intended, and Maitha went still. They looked at each other across the infirmary, and the truth of what was happening settled between them like something heavy and irreversible. "Try to shift," Maitha said. "Right now. Try." Thessaly closed her eyes. She reached inward, past the silence, past the hollow, searching for the place where the wolf had lived for 12 years. She pushed, pulled, called out into the emptiness with everything she had. Nothing moved. Nothing stirred. Nothing answered. She opened her eyes. "I can't," she said. Maitha's face went pale. 2 weeks after the fire, Thessaly woke in the dark and couldn't remember what Drystan's heartbeat sounded like. She lay still, staring at the canopy above their bed, trying to recall the rhythm she used to fall asleep to every night. It had been her anchor for 2 years, the steady, solid thump beneath her ear when she pressed her cheek against his chest. She'd known his heartbeat the way she knew her own name. So intimately it had stopped being something she heard and had become something she simply was. Now there was only silence. Beside her, Drystan slept on his back, one arm bent above his head. He was close enough to touch. She didn't. It had been 12 days since she'd voluntarily touched him, and he'd noticed. Of course he'd noticed. He was an alpha, attuned to his mate the way wolves were attuned to the moon, and the woman who used to curl into his side every night now slept at the far edge of the mattress with a careful strip of cold sheet between them. He hadn't said anything yet, but she could see it building, the questions gathering behind his eyes every time she pulled away from his hand or stepped out of reach when he moved closer. She couldn't explain it to him without explaining everything, and she wasn't ready for that. Wasn't ready to watch his face when she told him his Luna was hollowing out from the inside. So she kept her distance and let him think she was angry. Anger was simpler than the truth. The truth was that his touch felt wrong now, not unpleasant, just muted, like hearing music through a wall. Before the fire, every point of contact between them had hummed with the bond, a low, warm vibration that made her skin feel electric and alive. His fingers brushing her wrist could send a shiver through her entire body. His lips on her temple could make her wolf press forward with a contentment so deep it bordered on worship. Now his hand on her shoulder was just pressure and warmth, just skin on skin, just physics, and it terrified her so deeply she couldn't bear to feel it. The days blurred together. Thessaly moved through the castle like a ghost, performing her duties as Luna with mechanical precision. She attended council meetings and sat in her chair and said the right things at the right times, and no one seemed to notice that the woman behind the words was disappearing. No one except Maitha, and, increasingly, Drystan. He started watching her. Not the way he used to watch her, with the quiet, possessive warmth that used to make her blush and duck her head. This was different, sharper. He tracked her across rooms with a furrow between his brows, cataloging details like a man trying to solve a puzzle he couldn't quite see. "You're not eating," he said one evening at dinner, his voice pitched low so the courtiers wouldn't hear. "I ate earlier," Thessaly replied. "You look pale." "The weather's been gray." He set his fork down. "Thessaly." She looked at him. His dark eyes searched her face with an intensity that used to make her feel seen in the most profound, intimate sense. Now it made her feel hunted. "I'm fine," she said. She watched him decide not to press it, watched the effort it cost him, the way his fingers curled against the tablecloth before he picked up his fork and returned to his meal. That night, he reached for her in bed. It was a simple gesture, his hand finding her hip in the dark, his thumb tracing a slow circle against the fabric of her nightgown. An invitation, familiar and achingly gentle. Thessaly flinched. She didn't mean to. Her body simply reacted, contracting away from the contact that should have felt like coming home and instead felt like touching a phantom limb. The silence that followed was devastating. "What did I do?" Drystan asked. His voice was quiet, but she could hear the raw edge beneath it, the sound of a man watching something precious slip through his fingers and not understanding why. "Nothing," Thessaly whispered. "You didn't do anything." "Then why won't you let me touch you?" The question hung in the dark between them, and Thessaly pressed her face into the pillow so he wouldn't see her eyes burning. She couldn't tell him the truth, that his touch used to feel like the bond singing, and now it felt like proof the bond was dying. She couldn't explain that every time he reached for her, she was reminded of what she was losing, and the grief of that was so much worse than the absence itself. "I just need time," she said, and felt him withdraw. The mattress shifted as he rolled onto his back. She could feel the distance between them, 3 feet of sheet and silence that might as well have been a canyon. Drystan didn't sleep that night. She knew, because she didn't sleep either. The next morning, Thessaly went to Matha. She didn't go for comfort. She went for answers. "I need to know what's happening to me," she said, closing the infirmary door behind her. "I need you to find it in the old texts, the histories, whatever you have. Because I'm getting worse, and I need to understand how this ends." Matha studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded and disappeared into the archive room at the back of the infirmary, the one lined with shelves of crumbling manuscripts and leather-bound journals that smelled of dust and age. She emerged 4 hours later with a book so old the binding was held together with twine. "Sit down," Matha said, and something in her tone made Thessaly's blood run cold. "Tell me," Thessaly said. Matha opened the book to a page marked with a strip of cloth. "There's a name for what's happening to you," she said. "It's called the fading. It's been documented exactly 3 times in the last 400 years. When a bonded wolf suffers a perceived betrayal from their mate, a rupture so fundamental that the wolf interprets it as an abandonment of the bond, the wolf begins to withdraw. Not emotionally, physically. The wolf retreats from the host and starts to die." Thessaly's hands went cold. To die. "The wolf doesn't understand politics or logic or necessity," Matha continued, her voice careful and measured. "The wolf understands one thing, that their mate chose someone else. And for a wolf, that choice is absolute." "But he didn't choose her," Thessaly said, and even as she said it, she heard how hollow it sounded. "He saved her life. He would have come for me next." Matha's gaze was unflinching. "I believe that, but your wolf doesn't." The words landed like a verdict. "The 3 documented cases," Thessaly managed. "What happened to them?" Matha closed the book slowly. "None of them survived." The room tilted. Thessaly gripped the edge of the cot, her knuckles white beneath the bandages that still covered her burns. "How long?" she whispered. Matha's silence was its own answer. The nosebleeds started on the 18th day. Thessaly was in the herb garden, kneeling in the dirt with her bandaged hands sorting dried lavender into bundles when the first one hit. A sudden warmth on her upper lip, a metallic taste in the back of her throat, and then blood dripping onto the pale purple flowers like scattered rubies. She pressed her sleeve to her face and tilted her head back, breathing through her mouth, waiting for it to stop. It took 7 minutes. 7 minutes of standing in the garden with blood soaking through linen while the sky above her was absurdly, offensively blue. The bruises came next, small at first, appearing on her arms and legs without cause, purple-green smudges that bloomed like ink stains beneath her skin. Then larger ones, darker, spreading across her ribs and shoulders as though something inside her was breaking down cell by cell. She wore long sleeves. She covered her face with powder. She swallowed the metallic taste and kept moving, but her body was betraying her with increasing urgency. The fatigue hit like a wave every afternoon, so heavy that she had to grip door frames to stay upright. Her vision blurred at the edges during council meetings. Twice, she lost feeling in her fingers entirely, a dead, tingling numbness that lasted 20 minutes each time. She was dying. She knew it now, with a certainty that had moved past fear into something closer to resignation. And then Lord Cale arrived. Seraphine's father was a tall, silver-haired man with the quiet authority of someone who had never needed to raise his voice to be obeyed. He swept into Thornhaven with a retinue of 40, took one look at the ruined East Wing, and immediately began discussing reconstruction costs and trade agreements with Drystan, as though the fire had been a business opportunity. He was, Thessaly realized quickly, not a man who dealt in sentiment. But he was deeply, fiercely protective of his daughter. And his gratitude toward Drystan was not the polite, forgettable kind. It was political, strategic, the kind of gratitude that came with contracts and clauses and permanent entanglements. Within 2 days, it was announced that Lady Seraphine would be appointed as the permanent northern liaison to the Ashenmere court. She would remain at Thornhaven indefinitely. The court buzzed with speculation. Thessaly heard the whispers without needing shifter hearing because people had stopped bothering to lower their voices around her. A second Luna, perhaps. It's been done before, in the old bloodlines. She does suit him, doesn't she? Politically, at least. Thessaly arranged her face into the calm mask she'd perfected and said nothing. It was Joran who broke. The beta found her in the West Corridor 3 days after Lord Cale's arrival. He was waiting for her, which was unusual. Joran was not a man who waited. He acted, efficiently and without preamble, in the direct service of his alpha. Everything he did was for Drystan, which was why what he said next stunned her. "Something is wrong with you," Joran said, blocking her path. His eyes moved over her face, cataloging. "You've lost weight. Your scent has changed. You haven't shifted in weeks, and your burns still haven't healed." He paused. "I'm asking you directly, my lady. What is happening?" Thessaly stared at him. Of all the people in this castle, Joran was the last one she'd expected to corner her. He was Dristan's man, loyal to a fault, and Thessaly had always assumed his concern for her extended exactly as far as her usefulness to the Alpha. But the look on his face wasn't duty. It was worry. Something in her composure fractured. "My wolf is dying," she said, and the words came out broken and raw and real in a way that nothing had felt real in weeks. "She's been gone since the night of the fire. I can't shift, can't heal, can't feel the pack bond, can't feel—" Her voice fractured. "I can't feel him, Joran. The mate bond is going silent, and my body is shutting down." Joran went very still. "There's a name for it," Thessaly continued, wiping her eyes roughly with her sleeve. "Matha found it in the old texts. It's called the fading. It happens when a bonded wolf believes their mate has abandoned the bond. The wolf retreats and dies, and the host dies with it. That's not what happened, Joran said, his voice tight. He didn't abandon you. I know that. You know that. My wolf doesn't care about the difference. Joran's jaw worked hard beneath the skin. He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed. Lower, more urgent, stripped of the careful neutrality he usually maintained. The night of the fire, he said. I was there. I was in the corridor when the alarm sounded, and I reached the junction before the king did. I saw everything. Thessaly's chest tightened. Joran. He saw you first, Joran said. He saw you standing in the corridor, and I watched his entire body go toward you on instinct. Every muscle, every fiber. His wolf surged. He took 2 steps in your direction before the scream came from the east wing. Thessaly's eyes burned. He stopped, Joran continued. He turned, and he gave an order. 2 guards by name, specifically chosen, directed to get you out of the castle immediately. He didn't just leave you. He made sure you were covered before he went for Lady Seraphine. He tried to save you both. The tears fell. Thessaly couldn't stop them. It doesn't matter, she whispered. I know he tried. I know he didn't mean to hurt me, but my wolf didn't see a strategy that night. She saw her mate run toward another female, and that's all she'll ever see. Joran's face was stricken. You need to tell him. Thessaly shook her head. It won't change what happened. It won't reverse the fading. And telling him will only... The nosebleed hit without warning. Blood poured from her nose in a sudden rush, warm and fast, and the world lurched sideways. Her knees buckled. Joran lunged forward and caught her before she hit the stone floor, one arm around her waist, the other pressing his sleeve against her face. Thessaly. His voice was sharp with alarm. Thessaly, stay with me. The corridor spun. She tasted copper and salt, and felt the horrible, familiar sensation of her body giving up on something it no longer had the strength to maintain. Through the haze, she heard Joran calling for the healer. She heard footsteps, running. And then, distant but unmistakable, she heard a roar. Not a word, not a command. A sound ripped from somewhere deeper than language, the raw, guttural sound of an alpha who had just felt something terrible through a bond he didn't know was breaking. Drystan was coming. Drystan came through the corridor like a storm with a heartbeat. He rounded the corner at a dead sprint, and the sight of Thessaly limp in Joran's arms stopped him so abruptly his boots skidded on the stone. For one frozen second he just stared, his chest heaving, his eyes wild, his wolf so close to the surface that his irises had gone from dark brown to molten amber. What happened? The words came out barely human. She collapsed, Joran said, his voice carefully controlled. Nosebleed. She needs the infirmary. Drystan crossed the distance in 2 strides and took her from Joran's arms, not gently, desperately. He gathered her against his chest, and Thessaly felt the thunder of his heart against her cheek, so fast and hard it seemed to be trying to beat its way out of his ribs. I'm fine, she managed, the words muffled against his shirt. He didn't respond. He was already moving, carrying her through the corridors with the kind of focused, terrifying speed that made servants flatten against the walls and guards step aside without being told. He laid her on a cot in the infirmary and didn't step back. Metha, he said without turning. The healer was already beside them. I need the room cleared, Metha said. Everyone except the king and Joran. The door closed. The infirmary went quiet except for Thessaly's ragged breathing and the low, continuous growl rumbling through Drystan's chest. Metha unwound the bandages from Thessaly's arms. The burns were still there. Over 3 weeks old and still raw, still open, still refusing to heal. In the harsh light of the infirmary, they looked worse than they had that morning, as though her body had given up on the pretense of recovery entirely. Drystan stared at the wounds. The growl died in his throat. These should be healed, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. These should have been healed weeks ago. Yes, Matha agreed. Why aren't they healed? Matha looked at Thessaly, a question in her gaze, asking for permission. Thessaly closed her eyes. She was so tired. Tired of hiding, tired of pretending, tired of carrying this alone. Tell him, she whispered. And Matha did. She told him everything. The wolf's retreat, the loss of senses, the slow deterioration, the condition called the fading, and how it ended. She spoke with the clinical precision of a healer delivering a diagnosis, and Thessaly watched Drystone's face as each word landed. She watched him understand. It happened in stages. First confusion, his brow furrowing as he tried to process the information. Then disbelief, his head shaking slightly, rejecting what he was hearing. Then the terrible dawning horror as the full picture emerged. His Luna was dying, her wolf was dying, the bond was severing. And it was happening because of him. No, he said. The word was barely audible. No, that's not... I didn't... The wolf perceived a betrayal of the bond, Matha said, her voice gentle but unflinching. The night of the fire, when you went to Lady Seraphine first, the rational mind can understand triage, necessity, and context. The wolf cannot. Drystone looked at Thessaly. The expression on his face was something she had never seen before, and hoped she would never see again. It was the face of a man watching himself destroy the thing he loved most in the world, through an act he'd believed was right. I sent guards for you, he said, his voice cracking. I made sure. I would never have left you if I didn't know you'd be safe. I know, Thessaly said softly. Then why? He was on his knees beside the cot, gripping her hand, his eyes shining. If you know I didn't abandon you, if you understand why I... It's not about what I understand, Thessaly said. It's about what my wolf saw. And she saw you turn away. The sound that came out of Drystone was not a word. It was something broken and animal and so raw it made Matha look away. He pressed his forehead against their joined hands, and his shoulders shook. Thessaly lifted her free hand and placed it on his head. His hair was soft beneath her fingers, and the gesture was so achingly reminiscent of 1,000 quiet moments before everything shattered that her own tears finally fell. How do we fix it? Drystone demanded, raising his head. His eyes were red but fierce. There must be something. A ritual, a healer, Matha hesitated. There is one theory, she said slowly, untested, unproven. In the old texts, there are references to a bonding renewal, a way to reforge the mate bond from the ground up. But it requires something the original bonding didn't. What? Drystone asked. The wolf has to choose, Matha said. Not the human, the wolf. And a wolf that's dying doesn't choose anything. It retreats, going deeper and deeper into silence until there's nothing left to reach. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Thessaly spoke, and the words she said cracked the room in half. You can't fix this by choosing me now, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You already chose. Drystone recoiled as though she'd driven a blade between his ribs. His hand went slack around hers, and she watched the light in his eyes gutter like a candle in a draught. He stood, walked to the window, braced both hands against the stone frame and stared out at the courtyard where, on the night of the fire, he had carried another woman to safety while his mate watched. Then he pushed off the frame and left the infirmary without a word. Joran followed him. Matha began rebandaging Thessaly's arms, and Thessaly lay on the cot and stared at the ceiling and felt the place where the bond used to live pulse once, weakly, like a heart trying to beat with nothing left to pump. That night, she waited until the castle was asleep. She moved slowly, carefully, each motion deliberate and measured to conserve the little strength she had left. She pulled a traveling cloak from the wardrobe. She folded 2 changes of clothes into a leather bag. She took the pouch of silver coins she kept in her writing desk, a bottle of water, and the dried herbs from her bedside table that Matha had given her for the pain. She did not take the ring. Her mating ring, the silver band etched with the veil crest that Drystan had slid onto her finger 2 years ago, she placed on his pillow. Carefully, precisely, centered on the white linen like a period at the end of a sentence. Then she sat at the desk and wrote. The letter took a long time, not because she didn't know what to say, but because her hands were shaking so badly the pen kept slipping. She wrote about the fading, about what Martha had told her, that in the final stages, the severing of the bond could damage the alpha too, could weaken him, destabilize his wolf, compromise his ability to lead. She wrote that she would not let that happen, that she would not be the thing that brought him down. She wrote that she loved him, and that leaving was the last act of love she had left to give. She didn't sign it. She didn't need to. Thessaly stood in the doorway of their chambers and looked back one last time. Drystan was asleep, his face turned toward her side of the bed, one hand resting on the empty space where she should have been. Even in sleep, he was reaching for her. She turned and walked into the dark corridor. No wolf, no enhanced senses, no supernatural strength or speed. Just a human woman with burned hands and a dying bond, walking barefoot through a castle that no longer felt like home. The guards at the gate didn't stop her. Aluna could come and go as she pleased. They bowed as she passed, and she nodded in return, and none of them noticed that the woman walking through the gates of Thornhaven in the middle of the night had no intention of coming back. The road stretched ahead of her, pale and empty under a half moon. Behind her, the castle was a dark shape against the sky, one wing still charred and skeletal where the fire had eaten through. She didn't look back again. 2 hours later, Drystan woke. His hand found cold sheets. His eyes opened. The pillow beside his held a silver ring and a folded letter. The roar that tore from his throat shook dust from the ceiling beams, shattered the water glass on the bedside table, and brought 6 guards crashing through the door within seconds. Drystan stood in the center of the room, the letter crushed in his fist, his eyes fully amber, his wolf so close to the surface his bones were shifting beneath his skin. "Find her," he said, and his voice was something beyond language. "Find her now." Drystan Vale did not sleep that night, or the night after, or the night after that. He hunted. The Alpha King of Ashenmere dismantled his own kingdom searching for her. Every patrol was redirected. Every scout was recalled from the borders and sent inward. Joran coordinated the search with military precision, dividing the surrounding territory into grids, assigning teams, establishing checkpoints on every road leading away from Thornhaven. But Drystan didn't wait for reports. He rode out himself every morning before dawn and didn't return until long after dark. His wolf was unraveling, pressing against the surface with a desperation that made his bones ache and his vision blur between human and animal. He shifted and ran through forests on all fours, nose to the ground, searching for a scent that was growing fainter by the hour. Because that was the cruelest part. Even the trace of her was disappearing. Whatever made her smell like his, the unique signature the bond had woven into her skin, was dissolving like smoke in open air. Every hour that passed made her harder to find. The castle functioned without him. Barely. Joran handled the council. Matha managed the infirmary. Lord Kale, sensing the political situation had shifted in ways he didn't fully understand, maintained a diplomatic silence and kept Seraphine close. It was Seraphine who broke that silence. She found Drystan on the 4th morning, standing in the courtyard beside a horse he'd nearly ridden to death. He was covered in mud and forest debris, his eyes hollow, his hands raw from gripping reins for hours without rest. "Your Majesty," she said. He didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on the tree line beyond the castle walls, as though staring hard enough might make Thessaly materialize between the trunks. "I know what happened," Seraphine said quietly. "Joran told me. About the fading. About what the fire caused." Still nothing. Seraphine took a breath. "The night of the fire, when you came for me, I was grateful. You saved my life, and I will never forget that." She paused. "But I would give that life back if it would undo what it cost her." Drystan's knuckles went white around the reins. "I didn't ask for this," Seraphine continued, her voice steady despite the tears forming in her eyes. "I didn't ask to be the reason your mate is dying. And I will leave Thornhaven today, willingly, permanently, if that helps bring her home." For the first time in 4 days, Drystan looked at her. Really looked. And what Seraphine saw in his face made her take a step back. Not from anger, but from the sheer annihilating grief that poured off him like heat from a forge. "It wouldn't help," he said, and his voice was wrecked. "This was never about you." He mounted a fresh horse and rode out again. On the 5th night, Joran found her. A village healer 20 miles south of Thornhaven had sent word through the network. A woman had stumbled into her cottage 2 days ago, burning with fever, her arms wrapped in soiled bandages, barely conscious. No wolf scent, no pack markers. Just a human woman with nothing except a leather bag and a bottle of herbs she'd been too weak to open. Drystan covered 20 miles in under an hour. He rode so hard the horse was lathered white by the time he reached the village, and he was off the saddle before the animal had fully stopped. The healer's cottage was small, low-ceilinged, lit by a single oil lamp. Thessaly lay on a narrow cot against the far wall, and the sight of her drove every remaining breath from his lungs. She was skeletal. 5 days away from him had done what weeks of slow deterioration had only hinted at. Her cheekbones jutted sharply beneath skin that had gone gray. Her lips were cracked and bloodless. The bandages on her arms were stained through with something darker than blood. Her breathing was so shallow he had to press his hand against her chest to confirm it was happening at all. Drystan dropped to his knees beside the cot. "Thessaly." Her name came out shattered, a sound made of glass and grief. "Thessaly, I'm here. Open your eyes." Her lashes fluttered. Her eyes opened, barely, and they were wrong. Flat and dull and entirely, devastatingly human. No flicker of gold. No wolf behind them. Just brown. Ordinary. Fading. "You weren't supposed to find me," she whispered. "Don't," he said, his voice breaking. "Don't you dare tell me you did this for me." A ghost of a smile crossed her cracked lips. "The fading. If I stayed, it would have reached you through the bond. Weakened your wolf. Compromised." "I don't care," Drystan said, and the words were savage with sincerity. "Do you understand that? I don't care about my wolf, my throne, my kingdom. You left me to save me, but there is nothing left to save if you're gone." Thessaly's eyes filled with tears that she didn't have the hydration to produce. They sat in her eyes without falling, and the sight of her trying to cry with a body that had nothing left to give undid him completely. He gathered her up from the cot, carefully, so carefully, cradling her against his chest like she was made of something irreplaceable. Her head fell against his shoulder, and he felt how light she was, how terribly, impossibly light, as though the fading had been consuming not just her wolf, but her substance, her weight, her physical presence in the world. He carried her out of the cottage and into the night air. The village healer watched from the doorway as the Alpha King of Ashenmere mounted his horse with his dying mate in his arms and rode north through the darkness toward Thornhaven. He held her the entire way, 20 miles, 2 hours. His arms never loosened, never shifted, never let her feel for even a second that she might fall. This time, he chose her first. Metha met them at the gates. One look at Thessaly, and the old healer's face went white. She said nothing, just turned and led Drystan through the corridors at a pace that belied her age, and by the time they reached the infirmary, 3 junior healers were already preparing the cot with the quiet, grim efficiency of people who understood they were running out of time. Drystan laid Thessaly down and did not step back. "How bad?" he asked Matha, his hand still cradling the back of Thessaly's head. Matha pressed her fingers to Thessaly's wrist, counted, then moved to her temples, her throat, the pulse point behind her ear. Each location made the healer's expression tighten further. "The fading is nearly complete," Matha said. "Her wolf is barely present, a flicker at most. If we can't reach it in the next few hours." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "The bonding renewal," Drystan said. "You mentioned it before. The wolf has to choose." "A wolf that's this far gone doesn't choose anything," Matha replied. "It's barely conscious. Reaching it would require something unprecedented. Something no alpha has ever... Tell me what to do." Matha studied him for a long moment. "The bond was broken by an act the wolf perceived as abandonment," she said carefully. "To rebuild it, the wolf would need to perceive something equally absolute in the other direction. Not words, not promises, not human apologies. Something the wolf understands." "What does a wolf understand?" Drystan asked. "Surrender," Matha said quietly. "Complete, unconditional surrender. An alpha's wolf doesn't bow. It dominates, protects, commands. It does not submit." She paused. "But if your wolf were to willingly lower itself, to make itself vulnerable to a wolf it recognizes as its mate, that might be the one thing powerful enough to reach her." The room went silent, an alpha submitting to his mate. It went against every instinct, every fiber of wolf hierarchy. An alpha's wolf was dominant by nature, by design, by the fundamental architecture of what it meant to be an alpha. Asking it to submit was like asking fire to choose to be cold. Drystan pulled a chair beside Thessaly's cot and sat down. "Leave us," he said. Matha hesitated. Joran, standing in the doorway, opened his mouth to object. "Everyone," Drystan said, and it wasn't a request. They left. The door closed. The infirmary was quiet except for Thessaly's thin, shallow breathing and the distant sound of wind against the castle walls. Drystan took her hand. Her fingers were cold, limp, offering no grip in return. He wrapped both of his hands around hers and held them against his chest, against his heartbeat, and he began to talk. Not as a king, not as an alpha, not with authority or command or the weight of his title behind every word. He spoke as a man. "The first time I saw you," he said, his voice low and rough, "you were arguing with a merchant in the lower market about the price of dried sage. You were so angry your face was red, and you were waving a bundle of herbs at him like a weapon. And I stood there in the crowd like an idiot, in disguise, surrounded by my own guards, and I couldn't move. I couldn't look away." Thessaly's breathing didn't change. He kept going. "I went back to that market 6 times before I found you again. 6 times, Thessaly. The king of Ashenmere, skulking through market stalls like a lovesick boy, looking for a woman whose name he didn't know." His voice cracked. "And when I finally found you, you were sitting on a crate eating an apple, and you looked up at me and said, 'You're blocking my sun.' And I knew. My wolf knew. Before my mind caught up, before I understood what it meant, every part of me recognized you." He pressed her hand harder against his chest. "The night of the fire, I failed you. I know that now. I told myself I was making a tactical decision, that I was saving the person in the most immediate danger, that the guards would get you out, that I could save you both. And I believed that. I still believe the logic of it." He exhaled, ragged and unsteady. "But I am not talking to the part of you that understands logic." He lowered his head until his forehead rested against their joined hands. "I am talking to your wolf," he said. "And I am telling her that I am sorry. Not with reasons. Not with explanations. I turned away from you. In the moment it mattered most, I ran toward someone else. And you saw it. You felt it. And it broke something that I don't know how to fix with words." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "So I am not going to use words." Drystan closed his eyes. And inside him, he did the one thing an alpha's wolf was never designed to do. He surrendered. He felt his wolf resist, every instinct howling against it. The alpha's wolf was built to dominate, to stand above, to never lower its head. Submission was antithetical to its existence. It fought him with everything it had, and Drystan forced it down. Not with dominance, not with the iron will he used to command his pack. He forced it down with love, with grief, with the bone-deep terror of losing the one person his wolf had ever recognized as home. He poured every ounce of that desperate, consuming need into the act of lowering his wolf's head, baring its throat, offering the most vulnerable part of himself to a mate whose wolf was dying. The room went very still. Thessaly's hand twitched. It was small, barely perceptible. A single contraction of her fingers against his, so faint it could have been a muscle spasm, a reflex, nothing. But Drystan felt it through the bond. A pulse, distant, fragile, but undeniably alive, like a heartbeat heard through deep water. "There you are," he breathed. Another twitch. Stronger this time. Her fingers curled around his weakly, and the bond flickered. Not the steady hum it used to be. Not the warm, golden thread that had connected them for 2 years. Just a single, fragile spark in an ocean of darkness. But it was there. Thessaly's eyes opened, and for 1 second, one impossible, breathtaking second, they weren't brown. They were gold. The wolf looked out through Thessaly's eyes, battered and fading and barely alive, and it saw what no wolf had ever seen before. An alpha on his knees, throat bared, surrendering everything, choosing her, not first, not second, only. The gold flickered, dimmed, then steadied. Thessaly gasped, her back arching off the cot, and Drystan was there, pulling her upright, pressing her against his chest. He tilted her head back and found the mating mark on her throat, the scar where his teeth had claimed her 2 years ago, and he bit down. Not hard enough to wound, just hard enough to mean it. The bond detonated. It ripped through both of them like lightning through water, hot and blinding and so intense that Drystan's vision went white. He felt it lock into place, not the same as before, not the effortless, unquestioned certainty of the original bond. This one was rougher, rawer, forged in fracture and sealed in scar tissue. It ached where the old one had hummed, but it held. Thessaly bit him back. Her teeth found the mark on his shoulder that she had given him on their mating night, and she pressed her teeth into it with every fragment of strength her body possessed. The bond flared at the contact, then flared brighter, wilder, and settled into something solid and permanent and unbreakable. Not healed. Reforged. Thessaly sagged against him, her energy spent completely, her body trembling. But her fingers were locked in his shirt with a grip that said she would rather die than let go. "Don't you ever leave me again?" Drystan said, his voice wrecked. Thessaly pressed her face into his neck and breathed him in. Cedar and iron and warmth and home. "Don't give me a reason to," she whispered. He held her tighter and didn't let go. The wolf came back in pieces. First the scent. 3 days after the renewal, Thessaly woke and could smell the lavender oil Martha used on the bedsheets. She lay there for 10 minutes, breathing it in, tears rolling silently down her cheeks. Then the hearing. A week later, she caught the sound of Drystan's heartbeat from across the room and startled so violently she knocked a glass off the table. He was at her side in an instant, alarmed, and she had to explain through laughter that she could hear him again. "You're crying and laughing at the same time," he observed. "Yes," she agreed, and didn't stop doing either. The burns healed over the following month, leaving thin silver scars on her forearms that would never fully fade. Thessaly traced them sometimes, running her fingers along the raised lines, reminders etched in skin, not of the fire, of what came after. Seraphine left Thornhaven on a clear morning in late autumn. She and Thessaly stood together in the courtyard, and for a long moment, neither spoke. "I'm glad you survived," Seraphine said. "I'm glad he saved you," Thessaly replied, and meant it. Drystan never let her wake alone again. Every morning, without exception, Thessaly opened her eyes to find him already awake, watching her with an expression that had nothing to do with duty or guilt or obligation, and everything to do with a man who understood, in the deepest part of himself, how close he had come to losing everything. One morning, weeks later, Thessaly paused by the window. Her face changed. "What is it?" Drystan asked, instantly alert. Thessaly smiled. "I can smell the roses," she said. "From the courtyard garden. The pink ones the groundskeeper planted along the southern wall." Drystan crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her from behind, pressing his face into her hair. "What else?" he murmured. Thessaly closed her eyes and leaned back against his chest, feeling his heartbeat, steady and solid, and hers, sinking with her own. "Everything," she said,